You have found Behind the Lines, presented by BetMGM for Week 13 in the National Football League. My name is Stephen Andress, managing editor at thelines.com. Joined each and every week on this show by Christian Cipollini, trading manager over at BetMGM. In this episode, we will look back at the week that was betting in the National Football League in Week 12, the biggest public wins, the biggest public losses. We will also look ahead to the early week spreads and totals at BetMGM for Week 13. I will share any early week bets I have already put into my BetMGM account. And in this episode, we'll also wrap up with a look at the latest in NFL MVP odds. Is Jalen Hurts a vulnerable favorite or not? First of all, Christian, how are you? How did the Thanksgiving and the first Black Friday game treat you both personally and professionally?
Personally, it was okay. Professionally, very, very, very bad. It was an absolute bloodbath of a weekend. Favorites ended up going 12-4, which is awful for the book. One of the worst weekends we've had so far, so definitely the worst of the year.
All right, well, I think that's like only 3 weeks that the public has won this year, so it's not, the worst thing in the world for you guys overall for the season, right?
No, but this was one where we really didn't get many results going our way.
And I assume you started out pretty optimistic after the Lions lost that first game. I assume that was actually a pretty big public loss.
That was one of the few, yeah. That Lions game, we were thinking, okay. Early on in that Commanders-Dallas game, it was a close game. So we were thinking, okay, this is going to be the start of a good week. And then really went downhill from there. That Dallas game was bad. The 49ers game right after that, just as bad. And then into Friday, we weren't getting anybody betting the Jets this week. So that Dolphins game also, not a good one. 4 primetime games, 3 of them didn't go our way.
I would like to just not talk about the Monday Night Football game whatsoever, because that was, like my eyes are bleeding after having to watch that performance from those two offenses. But I'll at least ask the question of the Sunday and the Monday night games. What were the notable public wins since it was a big public week?
Yeah, for the public, most of them, pretty much every team that covered. Let's say the biggest one. The biggest swing that we had was that Eagles game where the Eagles ended up winning and then cover, or at least pushing or covering, depending on where you got it at. That was a massive swing for the book. We were super heavy on the Eagles. It looked like we were going to at least get one of the results our way. A lot of parlays ended up hitting off the back of that one, so that was that one was tough for us the way it went, because certainly could have went the Bills' way.
Anything of note? I know it was a lot of public winning in Week 12. Anything of note that was a headline public loss?
Yeah, last night. Last night was the only one, really. Last night in the Lions game. Those were really the only 2 of the week. Last night was great for the book. Actually was a pretty good winner. The dog winning and then almost no scoring is pretty ideal. So it was nice to get one back. But all in all, that didn't help. That didn't turn it in from a losing weekend to a winning one. It was still a losing weekend.
I don't know what that game plan was from Luke Getsy for Justin Fields and that Bears offense. It was almost like, we're going to throw a screen pass almost every play, and then right at the end of the game, when they least expect it, we're going to throw one down the field to set up the game-winning field goal. Like that was a brutal watch. I never want to watch an offense like that again. It was horrendously bad. And I don't know what to think of Justin Fields after that game. I don't know how you can evaluate. Like, if the point is to evaluate, I'm going like sports talk radio here, not Christian. I'm sorry. But if the point is to evaluate Justin Fields to figure out if he's your quarterback of the future, how the hell is that going to help you do that? Or maybe they already know that he's not the quarterback of the future. I don't know. It was just a big no thank you from me for that for the rest of the season. Let's move on, Christian. All right, let's look at the early week spreads and totals over at BetMGM for week number 13. And unlike most weeks where the Thursday night game is, 2 teams on short rest, with these teams playing on Thanksgiving, we actually have full rest between the Seahawks and the Cowboys, this one in Dallas. Where are we sitting on this one?
Yeah, Dallas, though, is still a pretty big favorite. 9.5-point favorites right now for us at home with a 46-point total.
And this has moved with some Dallas money early in the week too, hasn't it? This was shorter than 9.5 when you opened on Sunday night.
Yeah, a little bit off of Dallas looking good, and then off of Seattle looking awful against the 49ers.
When you look at this spread, how close are we to the ceiling of where the Cowboys have been rated so far this season? Because this seems very expensive against what most people would have as an above average team in the NFL still.
Yeah, this probably is the breaking point of it, but it tends to be that's kind of how they seem to close out games. Is if they have a lead, they continue to push and beat people down. So probably more so off of results based of how they've beaten teams, and then on the flip side, Seattle hasn't looked as good either.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Seattle has shown that a complete inability to punch above its weight class across 2 seasons now for them. And to me, like, it's an exercise of, what's the state of the league? Because on paper, you can rank teams and say, well, Dallas is a top 5 team, but the Seahawks are a top 12, 13 team. Should that be a 9.5 point spread? To me, the question is the haves and the have-nots in the NFL. I mean, the elites, to me, are so powerful and so far ahead of some of these other teams that the gap is wider, even though they're maybe only technically one tier down on your piece of paper. So don't just be careful for all the novice bettors out there rushing to the window to take what you feel is an above average team to cover a big spread like this. Now, maybe it's the right side. I don't know. I haven't bet the game, but I'm just saying don't be quick to assume just because the Cowboys are playing another above average team that above average team is actually a great team. That's not the case this year, in my opinion. I think there's a big gap between the top 5 and then, maybe a couple others at 6 and 7. After that, I think some years you might even just call them average team. I think Seattle and a lot of other years, Christian, would just be an average team, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. They definitely would. I mean, they probably are considered an average team. Their record, and they're probably going to make the playoffs just based off of the rest of the division or the rest of the conference, really.
Yeah, I mean, just the state of the conference, state of football, just because we have them ranked in the top 15 doesn't mean that they're actually an above average team. Just keep that in mind. Okay, let's move forward here to the Sunday slate for Week 13. And decent little slate here for Red Zone. Christian, let's start us off here. What do you have for early week spreads and totals?
Yeah, Colts-Titans. Colts are 2.5-point road favorites with a 43-point total. Chargers at Patriots. Chargers are 6-point road favorites with a 40.5-point total. Lions at the Saints. Lions are 4-point road favorites with a 46-point total. More road favorites, Falcons, Jets. Falcons are 2.5-point road favorites with a 34-point total. Cardinals, Steelers. Steelers are 5.5-point favorites at home here with a 40-point total. Dolphins, Commanders, one of the highest totals of the weekend. Dolphins are 9.5-point road favorites with a 50.5-point total. And then last of the 1 o'clocks is Broncos, Texans, where Texans are 3.5-point home favorites and a 46.5-point total.
Okay, Broncos plus 3.5 is an early week bet for me. Just looking at consensus market ratings the past few weeks, I can't get to 3.5 at home for Houston in this game unless you're giving a full 3 points for home field advantage, which I'm not for Houston. So that's just where I'm at with it. I think the market has been a little bit slow to react to this winning streak for the Broncos. I don't think they're an amazing team, but short of a 5-point win against the Cardinals, we also really haven't seen the Texans blow anybody out or win by large margins here. So I like the Texans. I have bets on them for futures to make the playoffs, but I think this is potentially one of the toughest defenses that CJ Stroud's going to have to face here with their ability to turn the ball over. And if you watch Broncos games, they're unforgiving. Like, they will hit the hell out of you on some of these plays and make you uncomfortable offensively. So that's an early week bet for me, really just a number play. I haven't really dug into the matchup yet. We'll talk more about that on the Megapod on Friday. For those of you who may be running to the window to fade the Lions after Thanksgiving, their meltdown there, and seeing that they're a big favorite again, this time on the road in the Superdome, just understand injuries are playing a factor here. We have a bulk injuries at the wide receiver position for the Saints. Chris Olave might not play. Rashid Shaheed looks like he's not going to play. Michael Thomas is already on IR. I don't know who's playing wide receiver for the Saints this week. Lynn Bowden Jr. is apparently a thing again. So, just a really tough situation for Derek Carr in the passing game there for New Orleans. And the last one I'll mention, I have another early week bet in this window. And it's the over in the Colts and Titans game, sitting at 43, I believe you said, Christian.
Yep.
And that to me is pretty low for what the Colts have been doing most weeks here with Shane Steichen. I think this guy is a sharp coach. I think he's a great offensive mind, great play caller. We saw that from the Eagles last year and their early season struggles to be consistent offensively. And if you look at the first matchup between these two teams, the Colts and the Titans, yes, the final score was only 39 total points, but a lot of really bad luck for that to not get into the mid-40s. The Titans in that game with Ryan Tannehill, granted at quarterback, it's now probably going to be Will Levis, but 6 yards per play in that one. The Colts had 7 yards per play offensively in that game against the Titans, despite the fact that they lost Anthony Richardson in the middle of that game and had Gardner Minshew come off the bench and play. The red zone inefficiency in that game is what kept this under. 1 for 4 for the Titans, 1 for 5 in the red zone for the Colts. That's not a reason for me to not go back and bet the over in this one. So I'm betting on some positive regression here with the scoring. So I will take the Colts and the Titans over 43 this week. Okay, Christian, now the late afternoon window on Sunday, if you will, please.
Panthers at Bucks. Bucks are 5.5-point home favorites with a 37.5-point total. Browns Rams. Rams are 4.5-point home favorites with a 39.5-point total. And then 49ers Eagles, where 49ers are 2.5-point road favorites with a 46.5-point total.
All right, the game of the week, the 49ers and the Eagles here. And, we were talking off air here before we started, but let's talk about it. Let's bring the viewers in on this, in your opinion of this. This movement surprised you, right? Because on the look ahead here, we had the Eagles as small favorites. And, what is your opinion of what this spread would be? And obviously the market has disagreed with you and your team, at least in the early week here.
Yeah, we had them about there, 1.5, 2-point favorites. But yeah, the market's gone completely the other way, all the way up to 2.5 and even at 3 at some points. I don't really see it. I know I'm also an Eagles fan. I got maybe a little bias going on me, but I know that they statistically aren't going to win all of their games in this stretch. So, this might be the one. This might be the one they drop. But the line to me is definitely interesting to see where the rest of the market puts them at. I had this much closer than 2.5-point road favorites for the 49ers.
This is just me hypothesizing a little bit of what's going on here, but sometimes the spot is something that bettors care about a lot, and the Eagles, this is a tough spot. They're coming off 2 really tough games against the Chiefs on the road and then a cold, rainy game against Buffalo that went to overtime. Defense was on the field for a lot of plays in both of those games, and now you're facing a Niners team that gets extra rest. They played Thanksgiving, so they're getting extra rest for this game, and they came out of that game against Seattle fairly clean. But this line now, Christian, if we take away home field advantage, this is implying that on a neutral field, the Eagles would be 4.5, 5-point underdogs to the 49ers. Is that a fair assessment of what's going on here if we strip home field out?
Yeah, that's usually what it says here. So that's, again, why I, find this line to be interesting and, didn't line up with what I saw. Because for futures book and everything out, we have these two teams pegged pretty similar, pretty close. I know we'll get a lot of info here. If they do meet in the NFC Championship, I wouldn't think it's the same line, but you're right. Maybe some of it's the spot. 49ers with rest. Eagles got a couple players banged up. I know Lane Johnson still has got some question marks if he's going to end up playing this week. He's usually pretty significant. So yeah, a lot of those factors, I guess, are adding up. Interesting.
Absolutely. And one last note I'll add here is I've been tracking the consensus market ratings all season long. Ben B. Baldwin on Twitter does a great job of posting those every week. It's a nice little resource for bettors out there to just keep an eye on how teams are moving up and down rankings and ratings each week. At no point in those consensus ratings have the Eagles been 5 points worse than the 49ers on a neutral field, or even 4.5 points worse than the Niners on a neutral field. So first of all, that. Second of all, we are dealing with under 3 points both ways here. I mean, it has touched 3 a couple times. So whether the Niners are a 2.5-point favorite or all the way to a 2.5-point dog, we're it's still in most games in NFL history, you're just picking the winner at that point. So these aren't exactly the most meaningful numbers in most cases. So that's potentially what's going on here as well. It does give you the opportunity to tease the Eagles as a home dog at this point if you're interested in that. I'm considering it. I haven't put a bet in on this game. I'll talk more about what I see in the matchups here. Full disclosure, I am a 49ers fan, and I did not run to the window to bet on this game because there's a couple of matchup issues in the trenches that I have my eye on that I'm at least a little bit concerned about going into this. Talk more about that on the Megapod on Friday. Christian, let's wrap up here before we talk a little NFL MVP with the primetime games, Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football for Week 13.
Yeah, Chiefs Packers. Chiefs are 6.5-point road favorites with a 42-point total. And then Bengals Jaguars on Monday night, where Jaguars are 8.5-point home favorites with a 38.5-point total.
Little love for the Packers here early in the week. I believe this was 7 across the board here, when we opened up on Monday.
Yeah, I think kind of similar to what we talked to last week, where the Chiefs are on the road is a big favorite, and typically that hasn't worked out in their favor. Obviously, it worked out last week. Probably a little bit of that. And the Packers looked a little bit better. Maybe that's where some of the bets are coming from that kept it off the 7. A lot of times, sometimes early in the week when there is just a number that is the key number, a 3, a 7, sometimes we just start taking bets there because, they have that 7 number. And so, yeah, that sometimes is where it comes from.
Jordan Love's won 3 of his past 4 games, albeit against defenses that are, in my opinion, nowhere near the class of what the Chiefs are going to present to him this week. The 4 games over the past month, the Rams defense, the Steelers, the Chargers, and a very banged-up Lions defense. So this is by far the toughest test in that stretch that Jordan Love will have to face. It's still a lot of points, though. The Chiefs typically, I know they came back and won by couple of touchdowns last week against the Raiders after spotting them 14 points. But for the most part this season, that has not been the case for the Chiefs. They've been, a little stuck in the mud at times against, average to above average defenses. So I'm very curious to see how this one plays out if Kansas City is all the way back and takes care of business and covers a big number like this. And I don't know what to say about the Bengals at this point. They're dead in the water. If this is going to hover around teaser range, less than 9, I'm very happy to tease the Jaguars here down. This doesn't help anybody now. I did tease the Jaguars with the Cowboys earlier in the week. Right now, I think the Jags are by far my favorite teaser leg of Week 13. You just got to try and find a dance partner for them at this point. And it's never the Titans at 2.5 with Will Levis. I think it's just a lot of volatility there. Some of these other favorites don't really want to tease the Chargers with how bad that offense looks. I think the Eagles might be the best option here for the other teaser leg. So I haven't put it in the account myself yet, but I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about adding another one here with the Jaguars. So just something for everybody to think about. Christian, let's wrap up here with the NFL MVP conversation. Something interesting happened at BetMGM this week with this market. After the big Eagles win against the Buffalo Bills, you guys reposted MVP odds, and you had one of the best prices in the market at 2-1 on Jalen Hurts as the favorite, and that now is down to plus 140. So it seems like you guys are in agreement that his odds of winning MVP are a little bit better than 2-1 at this point after what he has left in front of him.
Yeah, the MVP is kind of a weird award because winning is a big factor into it. So that really what puts Jalen there. But if his record was something different, he wouldn't be the MVP favorite at the moment. He has the stats enough to be where he is, but it just ends up being really, really weird, where certain people that maybe should have a chance, like we've talked about position players in the past, they kind of never really have a chance, and it kind of usually tends to be the quarterback who more often than not ends up being, the 1 seed in one of the conferences. So that's how you end up with Hurts and Mahomes as the 2 favorites with Lamar in there. And so that's where it's sitting right now at 10-1, two-game lead over every other team. Still a couple big games to go. I mean, they're dogs this week, so could still move a bit, but that's where it tends to sit.
Yeah, my opinion of where this market is, he's the rightful favorite. And now that they've won 2 of those really tough games, They have the Niners this week. Even if they lose to the Niners, still have the Cowboys game. Even if they lose to the Cowboys, Dak's going to get closer to him. But right now, they're still 2 games away from catching the Eagles. And chances are they're both going to be, if that happens, 5-1 in the division. And then it goes to conference record. In this scenario, the Eagles only have 1 conference loss at that point. 2 conference losses to the Cowboys and the 49ers. Now, the Cowboys right now in this scenario, if they keep winning, their conference losses this year, they lost to the Arizona Cardinals, and they've already lost to the San Francisco 49ers, and they already have another loss to the Eagles. So the Eagles, if they do wind up losing back-to-back and get tied with the Cowboys here, still have the 3rd tiebreaker over the Cowboys to win the NFC East. If Jalen Hurts wins the division, I have a hard time seeing him not winning MVP. And after this stretch of games for Jalen Hurts, he finishes the season with 3 cupcakes where they're going to be maybe 2 touchdown favorites over those teams. So the road is narrowing for Jalen Hurts to lose this award, barring an injury, in my opinion. I agree with you with the yardage stats. They're not there with some of the other, elite passers that we're used to seeing. And if you look at touchdowns, the darling of the analytics community, Josh Allen, has 4 more total touchdowns than Jalen Hurts, but he's 6-6. He's not going to win this award. I'm sorry. That's just not how some of these voters for this award function. Whether you can scream it into Twitter all you want, it's the voters who pick this award, not the analytics community. So if Josh Allen's going to be barely over 500, maybe miss the playoffs, he's just not going to win MVP. It's a marriage of stats and record. If you take away Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts has the most touchdowns of any other quarterback in the league by 4 right now over Dak Prescott. He has 29 total touchdowns with all the rushing touchdowns he has. Dak Prescott has 25 total touchdowns. I just have I have a Dak Prescott 40-1 ticket. I think he might just rise to the second choice and not win. I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. Christian, I'll ask you the question. Do you think Jalen Hurts is going to lose this award? First of all, let me ask that.
The next 2 weeks will determine the whole thing, because if the Eagles go 1-1 here, more likely than not, it's going to be his award because of those 3-game stretch at the end. I know the Cowboys still have a pretty decent schedule coming up. I believe they play the Chiefs and the Bills also coming up.
Yeah, and the Dolphins.
Yeah, and the Dolphins. So they're going to have some tough games. Obviously, if Dak goes and plays well in those games and they come out on top and win, he's going to shoot up that board too. But again, a lot of it is on how the voters vote, and they do take wins and being the best team in the league into that. So if the Eagles end up with that 1 seed, probably depends on who they beat. If they beat the Cowboys, that probably propels them into a better spot. If they lose to the Cowboys and the Cowboys win some of those games, Dak will have a much better chance. Same on the flip side, if Mahomes starts going off and they don't lose anything the rest of the way and they get the 1 seed, he'll be right back in it too. But then you can even talk about Lamar. So do I think he will? Probably, just because of that end of the year stretch. I think they'll end up.
His stats are so far behind too, right?
Yeah. It seems like they'll probably end up with that 1 seed. So that's, I think the 1 seed will end up being the deciding factor in the end, which I think will end up being the Eagles.
Quick fact check on both of us. Cowboys don't have the Chiefs on the schedule, but they have Seattle, Philadelphia, at Buffalo, at Miami, home against Detroit before finishing up against Washington. So still very tough stretch there. So hypothetically, Christian, last question for you. If Jalen Hurts somehow doesn't win this award, who do you think does?
Whoever's the 1 seed in the AFC. So that at this point would be between Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. I guess if the Jags win it, I don't know if Trevor Lawrence would have enough to get there. Maybe he would start to jump into that conversation. But I tend to stick with who's the 1 seed that ends up getting it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's going to be Jalen Hurts, to be honest with you. I asked you that. It's a good answer. You're right. I agree with you. But also I think that's a very small probability at this point. Even if the Eagles lose the next 2 games, he could still ball out, and the stats will carry him to the finish line, potentially as a 14-3 record. So that's where I'm at on it. That's where Christian's at. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody, because it is absolutely one of the most fascinating MVP races we've seen, maybe since Matt Ryan, when he won it on his efficiency, when when they eventually went to the Super Bowl, and we won't finish that sentence, Falcons fans. Thanks everybody for watching. We appreciate it. I hope it was helpful for you. Let us know in the comments what you're betting this week. Any questions you might have for Christian, we can fire off those questions back at him on next week's show. So leave them down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. And thank you so much. Best of luck with your bets. For Christian Cipollini, I'm Stephen Andress. This has been Behind the Lines, presented by BetMGM.